Wow, thank you. Thank you. I'm so glad that Bob Shillman read that exactly as my mother wrote it. First of all, my wife has instructed me, as I do in all my speeches, for those who already know, I have to let everyone know that, unfortunately, I have Tourette syndrome. There it is. It's a neurochemical disorder, causing me to make sounds I can't control and facial tics I can't control. I've had it since age 5, but I only have the moderate kind. The worst kind is where people actually curse for no reason and make violent physical movements. But every time I curse, it's for a damn good reason. And I only have violent physical movements when I'm dancing. And all my black friends appreciate it and like it. There must be nobody on the streets of New York City tonight. It seems all of New York City is in this room. This is the largest turnout in ZOA history that I'm aware of. We turned hundreds of people away. There's about 1,100 people in this room. I'm proud and I'm privileged to welcome all of you, devoted and committed Zionists, whose love of Israel and the Jewish people is inspiring. I believe that if there were Jews like you and Christian Zionists like you in this room, around in the 30s and 40s, world history would have been different and Jewish history would have been different. But we've learned some lessons from that awful time. Never again dare we be the Jews of silence. Never again. Certainly we're not at the ZOA. Only 2 weeks ago, the Jerusalem Post said the ZOA is a rare and courageous voice among Jewish organizations telling the truth about the ongoing Arab war against Israel, about President Obama's actions, and about the fact that Mahmoud Abbas is nothing less than a dictator terrorist. No other Jewish organization will publicly tell you that. We at ZOA are frequently called right-wing, as Jerry Seinfeld would say, not that there's anything wrong with that. We're called right-wing because we said 21 years ago, Oslo would lead to disaster, not to peace. We said many years ago, yes, the Gaza withdrawal would lead to Hamas controlling and missiles would come flying. We said 21 years ago, Yasser Arafat is a terrorist, not a peacemaker. Mahmoud Abbas is a terrorist, not a peacemaker. ZOA was and is not right-wing. We are simply right. And remember and use this line, truth is not a political position. Truth is not a political position. We all watched and felt great misery and pain the last several weeks over the pure evil of this Islamic, Arab, jihadist Jew hatred that is relentlessly pursuing nothing less than Israel's destruction. This evil hatred took the lives of so many precious and beautiful Jews, including babies and women and a heroic Druze Israeli policeman. I would like to ask, just for a moment of silence, of these precious souls that we lost in the last few weeks to these terrorists. Thank you. And when they're killing Jews, they scream, Allah, Allah, Akbar. God is great. What are they trying to say, God is great? Is God great because they're asking these Muslims to kill innocent civilians? We're the imams screaming against people who are screaming God is great when they're murdering innocent people. And of course we expected that even though the Palestinian Authority's Holocaust-denying terrorist dictator, Mahmoud Abbas, was forced by the U.S. to offer a phony condemnation, Right after that condemnation, he condemned Israel's incursions and provocations against the Al-Aqsa Mosque and accused Israel of wanting to destroy that mosque. In previous days, Abbas praised an attempted Jew killer as a martyr who rose to heaven while defending Palestinian rights. And they called the Israeli police who killed this terrorist, he called the police terrorists. Ladies and gentlemen, don't ever think that these evil Arab killers are extremists and loners in their Palestinian society. After their murders, thousands of Palestinian Arabs literally danced in the streets, handed out sweets to everyone, while displaying large posters of the killers as heroes, waving axes and knives and guns. The Palestinian government's websites and thousands of other Arab social media were proclaiming joy at what these heroes have done. So they are not, in their Palestinian Arab society, extremists or on the fringes of their society, as Charlie Manson is in ours. These killers are part of the mainstream, inspired by and lauded by their leaders, by their official media, and by the Palestinian people. We should never forget that. These are mainstream, these killers and these awful horrors. Remember, the PA regularly holds parades and ceremonies glorifying deceased Jew killers. They name parks and streets and schools and sports teams after them. They display large posters honoring them in their schools and universities. The Palestinian Authority pays pensions to the families of these killers. The more Jews they kill, the larger the pension. Can you believe this? And the world says nothing. And the U.S. says nothing. And a few months ago, Fatah merged with Hamas, a Nazi-like terrorist group whose charter calls for the murder of every Jew. And despite this horror, the United States said nothing. The world said nothing. This was a diplomatic Kristallnacht when the world ignored this merger with a Nazi group and said nothing. Not only that, we U.S. taxpayers fork over $500 million a year to this terrorist regime. During the Hamas war, we sent $47 million more to Hamas during the war. What message does this send? Edmund Burke said, "All that is necessary for evil is to triumph is for good people to do nothing." We not only say and do nothing, we pay for these people. Worse than doing nothing, we encourage them, we fund them. This funding must stop. And almost as painful as seeing the barbaric slaughter of Jews was the frightening and disgraceful response by many world leaders who only condemned Israel for building homes in areas that would never be given away no matter what, and condemned Israel for excessive use of force, and even talked about sanctions. And our own president, Barack Hussein Obama, showed no emotion and actually proclaimed a moral equivalence between Israel and the Palestinians by saying, too many Israelis have died and too many Palestinian Arabs have died. He shamelessly equated the intentional barbaric murder of Jews with Hamas Arabs who died in a war that Hamas started and refused to stop for 7 weeks. Who are the terrorists, Mr. Obama? Who is being terrorized? Shame on you, Mr. Obama, for these outrageous words of moral equivalence. And he even said that most Palestinians want peace. Really? He said that this past week. He wants peace when the emblem of the Palestinian Authority is all of Israel with an Arab keffiyeh over it, a picture of Arafat and the Kalashnikov rifle. This is Mahmoud Abbas's official emblem that he commissioned. And he doesn't say a word about it. I've given this to President Obama personally, and he just ignored it and told an aide to just put it in his pocket. In their own polls, 60% of the Palestinians reject accepting Israel. Most Palestinians don't want peace. Most Palestinians want to see the destruction of Israel. So there's been no change in U.S. policy despite the horrors of the last week. The message that we are sending to the Palestinians is clear. No matter how great the outrage that the Palestinians perpetrate, the world and the U.S. will demand no price. Imagine if the United States would have publicly said this week, we extend our condolences to the people of Israel, and we are now firmly convinced that the peace process cannot continue under such circumstances. We will support Israel using any military action against you, and we will stop giving you 1 cent until this sort of behavior stops. And I will say, America's attitude and Europeans' attitude toward Israel, I'm sorry to say, is very similar to the world's attitude toward Czechoslovakia in 1938. And of course, Obama has stopped Israel from using military action. He's on the verge of making a terrible deal with Iran. The truth is, Iran must be stopped from obtaining nuclear weapons. It is our duty of the whole world. The memory of the Holocaust goes beyond holding memorial services. It is not merely a historical recollection. The memory of the Holocaust obligates us to apply the lessons of the past to ensure our future. Mahmoud Abbas this week said Muslims will never accept Israel's claim that Jerusalem belongs to them. He said it belongs to us, the Muslims. This is a propaganda lie. Jerusalem is not holy to Muslims. It doesn't belong to them. Jerusalem was the capital of Israel under King David 3,000 years ago. It was never the capital of any other nation except Israel. When the Arabs conquered Palestine in 716, they made Ramla their capital, not Jerusalem. And notice it's called the Temple Mount, not the Mosque Mount. It's named after our Jewish temple. They always say it's the third holiest place. They never say the Temple Mount is the number one most important, most holiest place to Jewish people. The majority of people living in Jerusalem since 1840 was Jews, not Muslims, since 1840. Our Jewish holy books mention Jerusalem 700 times. The Quran never mentions it. Let me tell you something interesting. When the Quran claims Muhammad rose from the farthest place to heaven, they claim this is Jerusalem. Well, it doesn't say Jerusalem. Jerusalem was a famous city, and yet they didn't say Jerusalem. They could have said Jerusalem. And they say the farthest place. Yet in the Quran, they refer to Palestine repeatedly as the closest place, as the nearest place. That means it's highly unlikely that Muhammad went to heaven from Jerusalem. It was someplace much further away than Jerusalem. Let's not accept their propaganda lies. From 48 to 67, when the Arabs controlled eastern Jerusalem, they allowed it to become a slum. They destroyed 58 synagogues. Not a single Arab leader visited Jerusalem, even though it's so damn holy to them. There, I cursed for a damn good reason. They also constantly say, we have to end the occupation. Well, is there really an occupation? Israel's given away all of Gaza, 42% of Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, where 98% of the Palestinians live. The Palestinians have their own parliament, own schools, textbooks, newspapers, radio stations, TV, and businesses. Yes, Israeli military troops are there because they're terror cells constantly evolving to kill Jews. They're checkpoints because there's continuous terror threats. No terror threats, no checkpoints. No terror threats, no IDF in Judea and Samaria. We, in America, we have checkpoints at all of our airports. Yes, they're checkpoints. No terrorism threatened by Arabs. We would not have checkpoints at our airports. But they'll stay there as long as the Muslims are threatening terrorism against the United States. Only after Israeli troops left Gaza could they build terror tunnels and import 10,000 missiles. We dare not allow the same to happen to Judea and Samaria. God forbid we allow full sovereignty in Judea and Samaria so there can be terror tunnels there and have 20 Gazas in Judea and Samaria. God forbid we allow this. And also, are the settlements illegal? The British legally controlled Palestine, a region from 1917 to 1948. They gave 80% of Palestine away to Jordan in 1922. In 1948, they offered half of the rest of Palestine to the Arabs, half to the Jews. The Arabs invaded Israel. They said no. Jordan illegally seized Judea and Samaria in the 48 war. Only 2 states recognized it. This is unallocated land under international law. In the 67 Arab War against Israel, Israel begged King Hussein not to enter it. He decided to enter it, and that's why Israel captured it. After the war, Israel offered all of the land back for peace, and the Arabs said absolutely not. They refused peace. In 1988, King Hussein publicly relinquished his claims to Judea and Samaria. He relinquished them. And Article 24 of the PLO Covenant openly says the PLO doesn't exercise any sovereignty over the West Bank and Gaza. They have no legal, moral, historical, religious rights there. Every Jew who lives there, every home that's built in Judea and Samaria is legal and proper and moral. And there's not been a single new settlement built since 93. Any new building has been within the boundaries of the Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria that were established in 1993. There's been no new ones whatsoever. And finally, people say just give them a state. We all know, first of all, it'll be an Iran-Hamas terror state. Let me tell you something else. The Palestinian Arabs do not want a state if it means accepting Israel. Let me prove it to you. In 1937, the Peel Commission offered the Palestinian Arabs a state on 95% of Palestine. They said no, because it meant accepting Israel on 5% of it. In 1948, they offered them a state. They said no. In 2000, Ehud Barak offered them a state in parts of Jerusalem. They said no. In 2008, Ehud Olmert offered them a state on 97% of Judea and Samaria and half of Jerusalem. And Ehud Olmert told me Abbas never even got back to him. Last month, Egypt offered him a state on 618 square miles in the Sinai next to Gaza. And Abbas said, that's illogical. We won't have it. From 48 to 67, when they controlled all the lands they want for a state, they never established such a state. The Palestinian Authority has no interest in the state if it means accepting Israel. That's why nothing has worked. Their goal is simple. We must destroy the Jewish state of Israel no matter how long it takes. That's why, God forbid, we should give them additional power to be able to fulfill this odious dream of theirs by giving the Palestinians any more sovereignty and any more concessions that we've already given them. Just remember, Syria, Iran, and North Korea, they all have states. Are they lovely? They're monstrous. Sovereignty only strengthens the underlying power of the people who live there to promote whatever agenda they want. President Obama asked Abbas 2 months ago, will you accept a state if Israel goes back to the 67 lines? But he said you have to sign a clause, no further claims. Abbas said to him, I won't sign a clause that says no further claims, even if you go to the 67 lines, even if I get half of Jerusalem. I won't stop fighting for millions of so-called refugees to live there, and I will never say Israel is a Jewish state. So he made it crystal clear what the goal is. That's why it's insane. It is foolish. It is nonsense. It is anti-Israel for anyone to say, let's give these Palestinian Arab terrorists an Iran-Hamas state. God forbid we ever do that. I'll end by saying we must stop the appeasement, no more unilateral concessions. We must stop the $500 million in aid, especially as long as they have an agreement and a merger with Hamas. We must demand they change their textbooks that promote hatred and violence. We must move our embassy to Jerusalem. We must set up a commission on incitement define it, and impose real consequences if they don't stop this incitement. We must demand, of course, Hamas stop being part of the Palestinian Authority. We must demand that all the schools, streets, and sports teams that are named after Jew-killing terrorists, those names be ended. And let me tell you something else. We must demand of the Israeli government, don't destroy the homes of terrorists. Take the homes away, sell the homes, and give the money to the families who have been murdered by these terrorists. Let the terrorists know that they will contribute to Zionism in Israel anytime they harm a Jew. Let them know that they contribute to it. And I will end by simply saying, can we Jews alone be right when the whole world is saying we're wrong? Is it possible? The whole world is against us. Can we alone be right? Well, the history of the Jewish people has been that we've been right so many times throughout history, and the whole world's been wrong. Most recently, the Iraqi nuclear reactor in 1981. Israel destroyed it. The whole world condemned Israel, including the United States. We were right. The whole world was wrong. The whole world was polytheistic. We alone preached belief in one God. We preached a day of rest, and the whole world mocked us as a lazy people. We were right. The whole world was wrong. They said we crucified a Jew. We denied it. They insisted that such a thing must have happened, but of course it never happened. We were right. The whole world was wrong. They said that we took children's blood to make matzah. Ridiculous. They said we poisoned the wells of Europe during the Black Plague, the Crusades, the blood libels, the Talmud burnings, the Spanish and Portuguese Inquisitions, the ghettos, the Mortara case in Italy, the Dreyfus trial, on and on and on. We Jews have been right throughout history, even when the whole world has been completely ridiculous and wrong, and they're wrong again. And I will quote from the book of Joshua. We must be strong, said Joshua, and we must not be afraid, for God is with us. Our holy Torah promises that we are an eternal people, never to be destroyed, and so it has been, and so it will continue to be. The cause of Israel is moral and just. We must act and speak out with courage. Truth and justice and God are on the side of Israel and the Jewish people. With your help, with the help and the strength and the will of the Israeli people, with the help of the Israel Defense Forces, with the help of Almighty God, new miracles that we cannot foresee will occur, and the people of Israel shall dwell in their holy land for eternity. We will prevail. Thank you so very much. Thank you. Thank you so very much. I took all the time that Shmuley left over and I used it in my own speech. I simply wanted to say a way you can help us to promote our principled agenda. In your packets, sign up for the ZOA, for the Zionist Congress elections. Sign up for them. You can do it in the pamphlets that you have there. Send in a small check so you can vote. Vote for COA so when the elections come, we can fight for the agenda that everyone in this room believes in. Strengthen us by voting for us in the Zionist elections upcoming in 2015. Thank you very, very much.